Right now we are at the time that Germany is invading the Soviet Union, and I just brought the book that I'm basing most of the things on. It's called Hitler's Willing Executioners, and there are two pictures, I guess, this week that I would want you guys to see in terms of, we've been talking a lot about, mass murder, and we haven't talked about exact specifics yet. We'll start on that next week, but I just wanted to show you exactly how it looks, and the reason for that is because I think, as much as you can talk about it, at some point visually it has much more of an effect. Also, no. Also, also, it's very interesting to note that there are pictures being taken. It's very important to realize that somebody who's taking these pictures, they didn't just let anybody...
Yeah, who was taking the picture?
So they were taking it themselves.
Germans or Jews?
I'm going to let you answer that question for yourself. The whole point is that they were not... The Germans weren't ashamed of what they were doing, is the obvious inference. The first picture you'll see is actually what happened. Some of the time the Germans try to incite local people. So the first picture is everybody standing around watching Lithuanians beat Jews to death with steel poles. And the second one it's a group of women. It's before and after. They're waiting to be killed. They're all standing around. You see there are children with them as well. And you see before and after. The before pictures, they're standing there waiting. After, you see German soldiers, it's German commanders, going around from body to body, shooting final shots into the head when necessary. Okay, so it's rather grisly. But again, the point is so it's 151 and 155 in the book. But I just wanted to show you. You should see it for yourselves before we talk about it. So I guess we should give this. Today didn't have as much time as I would like, so today we're going to talk about the general point in 151 and 155. And tomorrow, next week, hopefully we'll talk about specifically what Goldhagen comes to talk about, which is the soldiers' individual actions and whether they should be morally culpable for it or not. And part of what I just mentioned in terms of that they took pictures is part of his argument that they weren't embarrassed about what they were doing, they weren't being coerced into what they were doing, that they were sending these pictures home. Yeah.
Were they destroyed afterwards or not?
The pictures? So the only reason why we have them is because they survived.
But didn't the Americans also take them with them?
No. So these, so maybe I should be a little clearer. So this is not these aren't in any camps yet. This is shooting in Soviet territory. So there were never any witnesses other than the Germans, and sometimes the townspeople. Townspeople knew what was happening. For example, Baba Yar is like right outside a city.
But didn't a lot of people not know what was happening? Like, weren't a lot of Germans like, I know we shouldn't say that because...
No, the argument of many historians, some historians have made that argument to say that they didn't know and people didn't know what was happening. In fact, Albert Speer himself makes the argument that he didn't know what was happening. Yet he was conscripting millions of slave laborers and they were dying. So at the same time that he says, I'm innocent, and if you read his memoirs, I actually read his memoirs, and I actually don't find him to be that despicable a character. He seems like a normal person. At the same time, he kept bringing in slave laborers and they kept needing more of them. So where were they going? So they were dying. So he should obviously have known that.
Some people are really stupid.
Yeah, I guess that one is. Yeah, Safi, what were you going to say?
Are they for certain that the ones where they shot them before those pictures are Jews?
Yeah, at the top of page 155 it actually says where it is. I didn't write that. But so those are before and after pictures. There are pictures, I'm going to bring it next week, there are pictures of actually before and after, like where they made them sit down before they shot them, and then the entire process. They documented the entire process. So, again, this is one of Goldhagen's arguments, that you can't say that these people have been forced to do it, and that they were ashamed of what they were doing, and they were only doing it under orders. One of his reasons is they obviously told people about it, and they told people about it in ways that did not make it seem like they were actually embarrassed of what they were doing. So I just wanted to preface that. So we're starting with the invasion of the Soviet Union. Anybody remember what day that occurred on?
September the 1st, I think.
No, that's the start of the war.
June 21st?
Close. June 22nd, 1941. Okay, so you're very close. How many men do you think the Germans used?
A million?
How many?
A million?
More.
2 million?
More.
3 million?
No. 4.5 million men along a 2,900 mile front. So from the Arctic Circle to basically, used to be the Black Sea where they went. So,
Around there.
so it was, yeah. So it's the largest military offensive in history, still. So, excuse me? Well, it worked for a very long time. So they were immediately remarkably successful. Part of it actually is that the Russians weren't allowed to actually. So you think about how they didn't know they were coming, right? It's a surprise. How exactly do you hide 4.5 million people? So the thing is that the Russians knew they were coming. In fact, they had a spy, I think in Japan, who basically said the exact day. The British warned the Soviets about what day it would be. So they knew what was coming, but essentially Stalin was remarkably involved with the non-aggression pact. He really wanted it to work, right? We mentioned how they kept sending AIDS shipments. Well, not AIDS shipments, but sorry, yeah.
Were there a lot of pictures found after the war?
So yeah, these are all. I don't know how you'd say a lot.
Like tens of thousands, like 150.
I would think it's probably tends more towards the lower number, possibly just because if you were a person that were involved in these things and you weren't caught, how willing would you be to show people that you were there, kind of thing. I would assume that there are more pictures. They have more pictures than are actually around. For example, I've never seen a picture of Belzec. Like I've never seen a picture of it. In terms of when it was actually standing. I've been there, but it's not, it's not really there anymore. I don't recall seeing pictures from Treblinka, like things of that nature. People knew about that. Hopefully we'll get to that. We'll talk about that. People knew, but I don't think there were necessarily a lot of pictures in terms of huge amounts. But I would assume that there's a lot more that they didn't find just because people didn't want to. Yeah, sorry.
Why did Hitler believe that it's why did he have to kill out all Jews? Why didn't he import them to different places?
Well, so they thought about that, right? We talked about they thought about sending them to Madagascar, things of that nature. There are various hypotheses. First of all, if you believe that he thought that they were as evil as he says, and that he wasn't being cynical, things of that nature. Then after he realized that he wasn't going to have a peace treaty with Britain or the U.S., basically he decided, so I better get rid of them, essentially. Also, so it's a combination. One, that nobody would mind. Two, that if the Germans thought that the Jews were as active a threat as all their propaganda says and all that what their thinking says, that they had to get rid of them, and that they made that decision. So they made that decision around now also, but we'll see that they didn't immediately move straight to everybody right away. Okay, so they were right. So the Germans were extremely successful all along the lines. I was talking about resource shipments. They kept sending things like oil and iron ore back. So he really tried to stop them. The Germans invaded anyway. So they were caught really unprepared from a tactical standpoint, so they were rather destroyed. The Russian Air Force was destroyed on the first day, for all intents and purposes. It really allowed the Germans to take basically 4 million Russian prisoners in that range. most of whom they allowed to starve to death. So they didn't actively, well, they actively killed some of them, as we're going to see. They used them as dummies for gassing and things of that nature. But
Russian POWs?
yeah, but mostly it was just they let them starve to death, so they made them work
How
without.
about the Einzelgruppen?
So we're going to talk about them. So, right, so in behind the army were the Einsatzgruppen. So, again, so Hitler made a decision, no future peace with England, so now is time to take advantage and go after the Jews. So they set up 4 Einsatzgruppen, but they were broken down. So it means special action squads. Doesn't mean anything, but so they were task forces. So they followed, because it wasn't, the army didn't move as one mass. They moved as independent groups. Right? If you know, armies are broken down to smaller and smaller units, but at the largest units they're called army groups, and there were 3. So there was North, Center, and South, and they had Einsatzgruppen behind each one. So A, B, C, and D would follow behind each one in separate places. So they were also broken down. And the important thing to remember also is that it wasn't only these. In fact, most of Goldhagen's point is that groups called the Order Police also were involved. So it wasn't just members of the SS, it wasn't elite members of the SS, it was also, as we'll talk about, was people who were older and unfit for military service, and they killed also. And these were people that, you know, were educated and older and had been in had seen politics before Hitler. Things of that nature to show that, look, it wasn't just they were blinded by propaganda. So it wasn't just SS units killing. That's an important thing to remember also. Yeah.
What was the need for like moving all the hair, or like?
They used it.
For?
Oh, what did they use the hair for? Oh man, I can't remember what they used the hair for.
And the cars.
What?
In the seats of the cars,
What?
They
Seats?
used the cars.
They used it for some sort of fabric. I forgot what. For some reason, I'm thinking of like linen. I'm not sure. But they used everything.
Glasses as well, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean
Yeah, didn't they make fats into soap or something?
So that's a little less tenuous. There's this story about the wife of the commandant, I think of Majdanek, and that she had lamps made of human flesh, and that they had soap from human fat. But I don't think I've ever seen that really. That's actually true. I don't think. I've never actually seen that substantiated. The things that they what?
They have
Sorry.
what they claim to be it in one of the Holocaust museums in Yerushalayim.
They do?
Yeah. So,
Well, I've never seen. I mean, I've never seen that was done. That definitely wasn't done widely.
it's on Har Sion in Yerushalayim if you ever.
In terms of that, I mean, you know, when they burned bodies, they didn't harvest the fat. I would say, and you have to remember these people that they killed. I would say in Russia, most of the people that they killed, they didn't actually use stuff from. Those are the people that they gassed that they mostly used stuff from. But so again, so there were 4 Einsatzgruppen. Again, we're going to talk about the Order Police. So we talked about the orders that they were initially given. So they were somewhat ambiguous as to whether it was men and women, and what it seems to be from the testimony of people that were in these units, the reason why it was only men first was because the Germans were afraid that the men actually doing the shooting wouldn't be able to psychologically withstand what it would take to shoot people at close range. Again, we're going to talk about how they would shoot people at extremely close range. So they were afraid that people wouldn't be able to withstand that. So,
Who are you shooting? Deserters?
no, Jews.
These are the guys behind the army?
Correct.
But the Jews, the Soviet Jews?
Correct.
And the army's not shooting the Jews?
At this
What are they
point,
doing different than the rest of the army?
what they do, they're the ones that were in charge of the shooting. So I'd say at this point in time in Russia, primarily the shooting was carried out by non-army units. So order police are even worse. That like they're like people that can't. They're more like people that come in after the army just to make sure things don't fall apart, right? They're police essentially, but they're a little higher than police, but essentially they're police. So it wasn't that army units didn't participate in shooting, but primarily they did not. It was mostly these units. And again, the locals were enlisted because, again, this was also because maybe get them to do it, and therefore the German people don't have to, shoot them themselves. So the first shootings actually occurred 3 days after the invasion, so really quickly. A commando of Einsatzgruppe A shot 201 people in a Lithuanian border town. And so these kind of smaller actions occurred throughout the next month or so. And the largest one was shooting 1,100 Jews in Lutsk, Ukraine. So again, it started off kind of small. Obviously not small. Any numbers of people shot is significant, but again, in comparison to what happened later, somewhat small. And what happened was Himmler went around to the shootings. He went and spent time with some of the units that were doing the shootings, and it's not exactly clear at what exact point, but some point Himmler saw that the men weren't reacting unfavorably in terms of they were able to take it psychologically, so the order to extend shooting to women and children was given. Okay, sometime start of July, middle of July, so really a month in. And in terms of whether this had any effect on the people carrying out the shootings, again, their testimony this turning point isn't remarked on as being significant, meaning that the people doing the shooting didn't view this as a change. They didn't view this as a change as going from we're shooting people that might be partisans to now we're shooting all the Jews. It went from we're shooting Jews to get rid of them, they happen to only be males, we're shooting everybody. And it wasn't viewed as fundamentally different. And Goldhagen points out that even without the order to kill women and children, the order to kill all adult males is itself genocidal. Because, for example, in the first half of July, men of Police Battalion 307, they rounded up all the Jewish males between the ages of 16 and 60 in Brest-Litovsk. So they killed between 6,000 and 10,000 men. So, again, when you deprive a community of all males, and the women are forbidden to bear children, which was something that originally was done, you're also going to get dying out eventually, right? So whether or not the order to kill women and children would actually be given, the community would die out over time. It's just not quite as final yet, right? So again, at this point in time, the idea of getting rid of all the Jews has definitely been taken. Even if there's some argument as to what the actual tactical order was, you can see that the intent wasn't to leave the Jews around. Okay? And at this point in time, when the order was given to switch to women and children as well, the amount of people killed escalated quite noticeably. For example, a couple of examples, 23,000 Jews in Kamenets on August 27th, August 28th, 19,000 in Minsk over two separate occasions in November, 25,000 in Riga over two times in November and December, and then what's the biggest one? The biggest single shooting.
Kiev?
Well, what's it called? It was in Kiev.
What was the name? Remember?
Somewhat famous.
Remember?
When you think of Jews being shot, what place do you think of?
Oh my God. I think Auschwitz, but I know it's not right.
Babi Yar? You heard of that? Yeah. The picture in there actually, right, you can see that. So what they did there was they cut a ditch and they put machine guns on both sides firing in. So it was all crossfires, they couldn't get away, and they made people run through. I've actually seen, what?
Doesn't that mean you're the grandmother?
It means something like that, yeah. It's the name of a ravine. It wasn't the name they gave after, it was the name of the ravine where they did it.
I know this is a stupid question, but if there's like, how many Jews they kill in this ravine?
Over 33,000 in 2 days.
Okay, so assume there's like 15,000 in one day just standing there waiting to be pushed through. Why not fight back? What are they pushing you through? With a gun?
Yes.
So if there's a gun, right? Okay, if you know you're dying either way, I know. Again, I can't judge.
I don't
You're
know.
hopeless either way. Why not try and fight it out? You know they only have X amount of bullets before they get you into the machine gun.
I don't know.
There were
I don't know.
4.5 million soldiers in the front, and however many and guys behind that, and they
We'll talk
just
about
call-
how many guys behind there were.
and they can call in as many army forces, and they got tanks, and they got.
You also have to remember they had no
And they got more
friends.
supplies coming.
The locals were against them also.
Some people tried to run and they just got killed.
People did try and, I mean, we're going to talk about, people tried to jump off of trains going to concentration camps.
Why didn't they do that?
They did try to jump off of trains. There were machine guns on every train. Some people got away, but you also have to remember, sometimes people got away and got caught again. There's some people that did it like 2-3 times, because where else were they able to run away? They ran back to ghettos because no Poles would help them. So eventually, the Germans got to the ghetto, the new ghetto where they ran away to. Then they jump off and run away again, and eventually nobody would help them. Now at this point in time, I don't know what they were thinking. To be honest, maybe they weren't thinking that people were going to get shot. Remember, we only know...
The end result.
In retrospect.
Right, I mean, in retrospect, it's harder, but I'm saying maybe they didn't think they were going to get shot, right? Or maybe they were worried about their children, or maybe they did fight.
That's the Holocaust. They show like the story of a person who survived. I think that pretty much everyone's being shot, and that person was shot in the arm joint, and they killed all the bodies.
Yeah, so the Babi Yar, there's 2 people that, and they got away by throwing themselves backwards and hiding under bodies, and one of them got caught the next day and got shot.
How did they get caught?
Because they're Jewish, and in the town, first of all, they got away with no clothes, right? So where they got clothes from is a good question, right? And then they're hiding, and everybody in the town is Lithuanian. They just got rid of all the Jews, so suddenly there's this other person that's there and that's around. You have to remember, everybody's looking. I bet you they got money for it. They got things for it.
So were they killed? Was that the guy?
Excuse me?
The guy who...
I think there's only one actual survivor from Babi Yar. There are only 2 survivors from Belzec, and they killed...
How many people?
They didn't.
What?
How many people?
600,000? Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. Well, there were revolts in all 3 Action Reinhardt camps, okay? And then it made the Germans change the security measures, which we'll talk about. A guy jumped off the train and stabbed the guard in Belzec. So after that, they were stayed a distance off. They used dogs, right? They used dogs a lot of the time. And also, you have to remember that when they got people out of ghettos, not everybody came easily, and they were shooting all the old people that couldn't move. So it wasn't like, you're right, a lot of people were docile and they went easily, but I'm saying at the same time, these were rather bloody affairs. It wasn't like they came in, everybody lined up and went. People were desperate for food also. There are a lot of things. It's hard. I don't know. I don't know.
I was probably on the energy to fight, just like gave up. Like.
Yeah, see, but the problem with that argument is that these people hadn't been starved yet in ghettos for 2 years. They just walked. That's the thing. They might not have known, right?
Yeah.
The Germans just walked in, said everybody get together, right? So they could be thinking, I don't know, they're going to move us, they want something from us, and then they just
Fine.
took
That
them.
makes sense until you see the first 1,000 people die.
You don't see them die.
Right, so you have to remember, people in small towns on the Russian border don't know what the heck's going on in the next town. So you would have to say that. What? Well, now they're in Russia. The eastern part of Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, Russia, Estonia, Latvia.
I know you can't judge anything, it just seems like sad. There was like only one real uprising of 6 million people. I understand that. I'm saying
I don't know. It's hard.
Jewish culture. It is.
Why? So that's yeah, dying al Kiddush Hashem is right, is a concept. Doesn't necessarily apply to non-religious people.
that's not dying off Kiddush Hashem.
Why? You're being killed because you're a Jew. Is there any other definition of al Kiddush Hashem?
I'm saying, but it's not like a Jew that's around it, it's just going to kill you.
Criterion.
Even more. There's nothing you can do to get out of it. You gotta tell, do this.
I don't listen. It's a question that's bothered people for a really long time, right? Ever since it happened. The whole reason why Yom HaShoah is on the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, specifically because
They're proud of it.
they're proud of it. Specifically because Israel's trying to show that that's the type of Jew we want to emulate. We want to be warriors and things of that nature.
Rabbis don't like that.
What?
Rabbis don't like that.
No, not particularly. But that's because we tend to group all. Yeah, it's not necessarily what you would associate with being a Jew. Not that fighting isn't a Jewish trait, but in terms of...
There's no political correct way of saying it.
I'm trying, okay? I'm trying. All right, so just by mid-July, we said... this is actually somewhat interesting. By mid-July, operational plans were being made for killing of Jews everywhere. Okay, so you might think that the decisions to kill Jews in other parts of Europe were not taken until later. Actually, once the Germans decided to kill all the Russian Jews, they decided to kill all the Jews. Okay? So again, you also have to understand, you can't necessarily say the original order wasn't genocidal. If suddenly you decide to kill all the women and children here, well, let's just kill everybody. So again, the genocidal decision has been made. So the reason why, this is Goldhagen's argument, because he says other people don't argue this way. When you hear gassing, that the Germans switched to gassing, a lot of people argue that it's because of German efficiency and they wanted assembly line murder. But what Goldhagen says is, again, more from the overriding reason from the beginning is that they were afraid that the people carrying out the shooting wouldn't be able to take it psychologically. So the switch to gassing was to find a way to take the psychological burden of murder off the people doing it. Okay? What? I don't know if it was cheaper per se. I would say the whole thing might not have cost that much money to run. It cost them money in terms of what they lost. They didn't. The building wasn't such a big deal. Camps aren't that big. Like you'll see, like the Action Reinhardt ones are like 400 meters by 600 meters. It's like a couple football fields. It's not even that big.
That's a stupid question. Right? If your goal is to kill all the Jews, right?
Yep.
Why would you invent camps? Why would you just get them, stick them directly into a gas chamber? Why invent the idea of a camp?
Wait, hold on. Extermination camps they didn't leave most of them. They killed most people on arrival.
Why make the camp? Why make there be broken order? Why make there be this? They weren't working for anything.
What do you mean?
Morale.
They wanted a central place to kill them.
No, but they went to camps. They had a different job. If I don't, as you walk in, why don't they shoot? I'm trying to understand. I never understand.
Why don't they shoot?
You say, why are
When they're getting off
They
the
did
train,
kill
why
them
are
right
they
away.
standing there with
Why
the
do people
machine guns?
survive?
Why are there people who are in Auschwitz and walked out?
You want to
Auschwitz is different than all the other ones.
Okay, why are there people?
Auschwitz, they had people working.
That's why I'm asking.
Again,
Why were there ever people?
the amount of survivors from Treblinka is under 100. The amount of survivors from Sobibor is around there. The amount of survivors from Belzec is 2. The amount of survivors from Chelmno is also under 10. They did not leave these people around for a very long time. What they did was, they did it in a way that they had the least amount of trouble to deal with. They got the Jews, they funneled them into the gas chambers, and they killed them.
Okay, Auschwitz. Why not kill them if they got off the train? They didn't do
This is, you have to remember they wanted to get, Auschwitz is a big example of what they learned from the other camps. From the other camps, we'll talk about, when they wanted to stop, when they wanted to leave, they had been burying all the bodies. They had to burn them. They had to burn 600,000 bodies, which takes a long time, right? So the crematoria in Auschwitz, were the crematoria separate from the gas chambers in Auschwitz?
I don't know.
The answer to that is no. They made the Jews come in, they went downstairs, they killed them downstairs, they took their bodies up and they burned them. That's rather efficient. They killed them right away. What?
Why did they leave the camps then?
Well, they wanted some amount of work.
They were just putting work.
What?
They did put work. My grandmother told no, she
Yeah, some of them.
They made uniforms for themselves to wear before they died.
Some of them was. Some of it.
She told me, pick up like rocks and just like break them.
Some of it was pointless work, and some of it wasn't. I would say most of it was pointless work, but around Auschwitz there were a lot of satellite camps. I haven't put it together yet, but Dachau at the end of the war had like 75 satellite camps and 5,000 guards.
Really?
Yeah, so I mean, they were using some of them. Also, Auschwitz had non-Jews as well.
They had like gypsies and gays and blacks.
Yeah, they had. Well, I would think blacks, not really, because they weren't any there really. But again, so they had. The killing was rather efficient. We'll talk about it, but I think they decided. Again, they didn't want to shoot. The whole thing is they didn't want to shoot them because it would be too psychologically taxing. So they did the next best thing. And in terms of gassing them, they could process them very quickly. They did not leave them milling around for very long. Again, in the Action Reinhardt camps, they killed everybody right away, except for mostly males, young males, somewhere between your age or a little younger than 30.
They didn't kill.
They did not kill right away.
What did they do with us?
They would, in those camps, they had people be barbers. They had to sort through all the clothes. Because the first months it ran, it was unregulated. Apparently, when a commandant showed up there to see what was going on, and it was something like piles of clothes, like feet high. So they got people to do things like sorting. They had whole groups of people. But in Auschwitz, they worked them for a while. What? They did actual work. I mean, Primo Levi did work. In terms of he worked in a rubber making plant. They made Jewish women do a lot of it was artillery shells, was the fuses and things like that. But they killed most of the Jews right away when they took them there. But just quickly, the first time they experimented with gas, Zyklon B was used on September 3rd, 1941. In Auschwitz, actually, was where they first tried it. It was in Auschwitz I, which, if you haven't been there, it's hard to understand, but they're actually two separate places. There's Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is where they killed everybody. In Auschwitz I, that's where they did medical experiments and things like that. What? Yeah. Auschwitz-Birkenau is where they killed everybody.
No one survived.
Not everybody. That was where the crematorium, most of them were. Those were where the main crematorium. There was only one crematorium in Auschwitz I. I could bring in pictures. I have some from being there. Again, so they killed 850 people, 600 of which were Russian. From
Because
Auschwitz?
they had the march after.
I can't remember. I don't know. A fair bit of people have been through there. Like my grandmother was there and then went somewhere else. Yeah, so people went somewhere else when the death marches, which again, Goldhagen talks about also. Wholesale gassing at Auschwitz didn't begin until March 1942, which is around the time where the Action Reinhardt camps opened. Treblinka opened the latest, which was July 1942.
It's like the gassing, like, for example, in the beginning, was there like mistakes that got successful with killing them? Like, what would happen?
Well, that would take a very long time, yeah.
What would happen? If you had to experiment on Jews, like, they would know.
There were times, okay, so I was going to say the first operational gassings were in Chelmno and gas vans. Okay, and that's, what?
They drove around gas vans.
They used buses. It looks like a school bus.
They
Is
drove
the
around
picture
with
in
the
there?
exhaust.
I think it's in there. Yeah, they would hook up the exhaust. You know how people commit...
No.
No.
Just
Okay, so the Action Reinhardt camps...
What happened to the bus driver?
yeah.
What?
What happened to the bus
I think they hermetically sealed it. I don't know exactly how. But they would drive around until they were all dead.
Maybe like if it didn't work, for example, like with the gas chambers, like what happened? How did it work the first couple times?
So they had to experiment with how much to use, how to build the vents. I think the vents in Auschwitz are built differently. Were built differently, or over time they were built differently. They rebuilt gas chambers. You have to remember the Action Reinhardt camps weren't Zyklon B, they were carbon monoxide. They just used huge engines, like tank engines. But if they broke down, they'd have to fix it, and the Jews would be stuffed in there for hours, and then they'd fix it. So, they had time to perfect it, would be my answer to you in that sense. So, it's actually... I think the most shocking thing to learn is that within a year of opening the camps, 75 to 80% of the Jews, of the eventual Jewish victims, were already dead. Yeah. So most of the people that would be killed by the Germans were killed by the end of 1943. I think the reason why we don't think that way is because a lot of us are Hungarian, and that happened much later. No, because you don't think about it that way. You think about...
1942 gone.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know, when I was a kid, the thing I used to think about most was 44 and on. But actually, 44 and on was when it was really ending.
Not Hungary.
The Hungarians were the last ones, and it happened really fast.
So when did it really start?
It started now. The shooting started in June 1941, and gassing started... The first gassing in Chelmno was December 8th, 1941. So by the end of 1941. And so they killed 2 million Polish Jews in the Action Reinhardt camps and 2 million Jews by shooting in gas vans in Russia, or Russian territory.
Were the Germans fighting? Like, was there like any fighting on it?
More forward at that. The time...
Africa?
What?
Like they went to Africa and something?
Well, yeah, but I mean, by that time in Russia, they were so much further east that it wasn't really fighting at that point in time. Again, so that's where we are for now. Next week we'll talk about the individual shootings, and we'll talk about an example or two.